as we talk about a lot, one of our goals as a firm is to do holistic financial planning. And one of the things that people don't often see connected to the holistic financial planning process is this whole idea of estate planning. So one of the first questions we'll ask when people come in is, well, do you have a will or do you have a trust? And if the answer is neither, then that's obviously something that we want to address. Even our young clients that'll come in that'll say, well, I don't know, do I need one? We don't really have anything. Well, do you have kids? Yeah. Well, then you need a will. At a minimum, you want to have a will because ultimately you want to decide who's going to care for your kids if you're not around, as opposed to the state or the government deciding, who's going to care for those kids. So one of the things I want to talk through today is we are not estate planning attorneys, so we can't, we're not going to offer legal advice and get engaged on those sides. But one of the things we can do is to kind of educate people on the difference between a will and a trust, because those are two estate planning buzzwords that you hear a lot about. And we'll get a lot of questions from people that'll say, well, do I need a will or do I need a trust? And what in the world is the difference? So today what I want to do is just give you a quick rundown on some of the high level differences between a will and a trust. Let's start with a will. So a will is simply a legal document. That's all it is. It's basically a list of your final wishes that if something happens to you, here's the list of things that I would like to see happen. It'll be a power of attorney. So if you're not able to make decisions on your own, here's who I want to make decisions for me financially, for my health, things like that. You'll determine those through the will writing process. And ultimately too, what do I want to happen with my kids? And what do I want to happen with my assets if I'm gone? That's all it is a legal document, your final wishes to get that done. A trust is going to be more of a legal arrangement. So a trust is actually going to be a separate entity almost, we'll call it, where you're actually transferring assets into a different ownership structure. What the trust is going to allow you to do is have a little more control if something should happen to you in how those assets are dispersed. For instance, let's say you have younger kids and you're worried that if something happens to you, they're going to have all these assets and you're a little worried about how they're going to spend them or what they're going to do with it. A trust is going to allow you to kind of control a little bit more when they have access and how they have access and what that looks like. The biggest thing a trust is going to do that a will is not is avoid this whole idea of the probate process. The probate process is a big one that people talk about a lot, and basically it's a legal process where a lawyer is going to get involved and determine what happens with your assets when you're gone. The will is not going to avoid the probate process. Your heirs are going to have to pay an attorney to read the will and distribute those assets as you wish, as your will says. The trust is going to handle that in and of itself, and so you're not going to have to go through the probate process. Some of the reasons people want to avoid the probate process is cost. It can be a fairly spendy process, and two, privacy. The probate process is a public process, and so you can basically, if anybody wants to find out what sort of assets were passed through a probate process, they can go and find that out. Doing the trust is going to keep your affairs a little more private as you do it that way. There are a ton of different trust options out there. We're certainly not going to dive into all those today. But again, the biggest difference is document versus arrangement and how that's structured when you're actually gone. The big question we always get is, which one do we need? And that's so different for everybody. So what I would tell you is, if you've not engaged in this conversation at all, we're a great place to start, because we can have some high level conversation when it comes to what do these things do, what's going to be important for you, for where you're at and what you're trying to accomplish. Ultimately, when it comes down to making a recommendation on will versus trust, or actually putting something into place, we'll refer you off to an estate planning attorney and make sure that they treat you really well through that process. So if you've not engaged in it at all, give us a shout. We'd love to talk through it with you. But ultimately, again, that's what it comes down to, is we want to be the ones to ask these questions on your behalf, because there's a lot of people that aren't thinking about them. So that's our challenge, is to try to dig into these different areas of your financial life and try to quarterback, that situation for you and get you going where you need to go in order to give yourself a sound financial plan all the way around.